The Dreamer's Edge podcast is recorded in back of a live studio audience. Hi everyone, this is Dimitri, webmaster of thedreamersedge.com and movie critic for AskMan.com.
And this is Kaz, an English editor for Deluxe Digital.
Today we have a treat for you. We're all about 90s nostalgia and why it's not happening. Essentially is what we're going to do. So we're going to start with some quick show and tell. We're going to recommend a couple of things. How about you? Well, go ahead.
Okay. Nightmare Before Christmas.
Ooh,
I've always been... I like the Tim Burton world. I love this idea of Jack. You know, he's the king of Halloween Town. He's become a little disenchanted with Halloween. It's basically the same thing over and over again. And he happens to catch, on television, I think it is, he learns about Christmas. And Christmas intrigues him. He finds this idea interesting. So he decides to tell the town, guess what? We're going to take over Christmas. And it's just so funny because they're operating in this very different sort of world where it's all about monsters and being scared and candy and stuff like that. Their concept of Christmas cannot get beyond sort of their Halloween sort of mode. So naturally, all sorts of chaos ensues when Jack kidnaps Santa Claus and brings him back to the Halloween world and attempts to bring Christmas to the people of the world, and it all goes horribly wrong. It's quite fun. So I would definitely go for that. And I also am a big fan of stop motion animation, which is part of the reason why I really like that. And, you know, to be honest, I'm a goth chick at heart, so I like that sort of world.
And also, it's a great pick because that movie's going to come out in 3D next year. So you can actually check it out of the theater experience, which I think is the best way to watch a movie anyway.
Yeah.
My pick for this show and tell is a little movie by a Quebecois director by the name of Alan Boyle, who would later do Empire Records. And it's Pump Up the Volume, which came out right at the beginning of the 90s, 1990, and yet somehow manages to encapsulate the spirit of the 90s right there at the onset. It's about a shy teenager played by an up-and-coming Christian Slater. It's funny to say the word up-and-coming because Christian Slater embodies the 90s and the fact that his career started in 1990 and ended in 1999.
Didn't it end before that, actually?
Quite possibly. But he plays a shy student in a corrupt school who has a pirate radio persona where he manages to connect with teenagers everywhere by communicating the same angst that they feel. And it's beautiful because in this movie, it's not a bad thing to be disenfranchised. It's not a bad thing to have angst. It's part of natural growth. And the movie argues that if kids in those days were only given a voice, an outlet, everybody would gain from that.
Yeah.
Which is kind of ironic when you look at it today because kids do have an outlet. It's called the internet and YouTube. And they're mostly using it to make poop jokes and video game reviews.
Yeah. No, sorry. I just had this image also of them beating up their classmates.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, not so great.
Yeah, no. So, I give a strong recommendation for Pump Up the Volume because every time I see it, it makes me think of how I felt in those days. What were my aspirations of life? And it makes me compare them to what my life is now and what my aspirations are now. And I get caught in that loop for about a couple of days every time I watch Pump Up the Volume. It's very effective that way. On the other hand, I give the YouTube generation a major thumbs down. So let's talk about what defined the 90s.
My impression of the 90s is that it was very schizophrenic, at least in terms of film. I don't think we really had an idea of what we wanted to do or where we wanted to go. Some of the trends from the 80s continued, like the big action sort of picks that you get with like Speed.
I actually think Speed is very 90s because it's a lot more self-aware.
Oh, maybe it is.
All right, well, we blew up a bus, now we blew up a train. Now let's blow up a train.
Perhaps what I'm thinking of is more in terms of the big budgets. And then you have people who were basically known for comedy in the 80s, like Tom Hanks. And then he emerges in the 90s as this kind of serious drama guy, which is kind of... I don't know if people saw that coming.
Yeah, and no one realized he would be that pompous about it too. But,
Yeah, I know, exactly, which is kind of weird. I'm actually surprised by how many people think he's really a stellar dramatic actor.
no, I think actually he's quite talented. Certainly now. You bring up Tom Hanks reminds me that there was this new wave of quote unquote serious cinema. The 90s. This is the
True.
decade of Schindler's List.
That is true. I think they were trying to move away from sort of what they considered the fluff of the 80s and try to immerse themselves in serious issues, serious drama, which I guess in a way you can almost see starting with Tom Hanks, weirdly enough, at the head of this, with Philadelphia dealing with AIDS,
Yes.
right? Then you get Schindler's List dealing with the Holocaust. Another big issue, well, I mean, not that it didn't exist before, but a feminine sort of consciousness coming into the 90s. The films like Thelma and Louise, The First Wives Club, A League of Their Own.
Yes.
Yeah.
I actually think feminism went awry a little bit. I'm a hardcore feminist. I've worked in women's center volunteers, and I still get really annoyed at what passes for feminism, which is just sexism towards men.
Yeah, that's really what it is with these films. Like with The First Wives Club, basically for some bizarre reason, these women all marry douches who dump them for younger women. And it's all about revenge, which is sad and pathetic. Thelma and Louise, it seems like the only... I don't know.
I actually think that is a legitimate feminist movie. It's not about the evil men surrounding them. It's about the way that these women are cornered, which is not the same thing.
Which is a good contrast to The First Wives Club.
One of the frustrating things about growing up in our generation, Kazim and I, Home Improvement, which lasted, 9 years or something like that?
It was a long series.
Was all about how men are Neanderthal idiots who need to be more feminine to be intellectual equivalents to women, who marry these Neanderthals and then get to condescend to them throughout the entire marriage, and that's what a correct marriage dynamic is.
Yeah.
It's condescending towards men in obvious ways, but it's also condescending toward women, where really your portrayal of female empowerment is to be a bitch.
It's basically the inverse of their, male misogynists of the 1980s. Now you've got the female version in the 90s, and then now you've got the backlash coming from men who have no idea how to construct their sexual identity.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it, because Home Improvement was geared towards a young audience. It was a family show. And you grew up as a guy, and many guys of my generation feel that frustration, and they write me about it because I write for a men's magazine. And they grew up feeling like they have to tell everybody that they're lesser than they are, otherwise they're being sexist.
Yeah, they have to belittle themselves.
Exactly. I mean, back in those days, schools have finally figured out that the reason why guys were scoring better in school is because education was geared towards a male mind.
That is true.
And they realized that if you taught things in a different way, female minds responded to it much better.
Yeah.
The moral of that discovery is quite simple and should be obvious to everyone. It is male minds and female minds at early development stages work differently, and they need to be addressed differently.
Exactly.
You need to teach a boy differently than you teach a girl. Of course, because it was the 90s back then, here's the moral that they got out of it. Oh, men just look smarter because we teach differently. If we teach the correct way, it proves that women are smarter.
The correct way. Yes, that was rather unfortunate because then you start to see a very high dropout rate amongst young males. Which is like, the whole point is not to leave men behind. Like, I'm trying to think of, besides Thelma and Louise, I'm trying to think of another film where I feel the female characters have a good sense of feminine empowerment that isn't at the expense of their male counterparts.
Terminator 2, Sarah Connor's character, when people try to make a strong action hero that's a female, and that's even today, they turn them into guys with female physical attributes.
Yeah.
Sarah Connor is a woman through and through. Her strength is a female strength. She talks about motherhood an awful lot, and she's not physically strong, but she can endure a lot.
Yes.
Which is a lot more typical of the female ideology.
Yeah. No, that's actually a very good example.
What were we talking about? Big issue movies. That's what we were talking about.
Big issue movies, capital punishment, racism.
Homosexuality came out.
Yeah. Which again ties into Philadelphia as well.
I think there was this realization that during the 80s we were all very shallow and we should be ashamed of ourselves, and there was this kind of reaction of trying to be more meaningful to the nth degree and coming off a bit pompous as a result, in all honesty.
We were trying so hard to legitimize ourselves at that point and went over the top.
For me, it's like the 80s are a petulant child and the 90s are an angry teenager. But they're both conceited.
That's true.
And in the music, there's just this sort of malaise where it's like, oh, enough with the corporate. So punk was revived because of this. Grunge, the whole idea of like, I'm too good to take care of my hygiene.
Exactly. We're kind of wallowing in our filth at this point.
That's what grunge is. People don't groom it, people mumble into the mic.
Yeah.
Kurt Cobain rules.
Yeah, exactly.
Kurt Cobain was a chicken. He took the easy way out and killed himself, and then everybody blamed, what's the girl from Garbage?
Oh, Courtney Love. Yeah, I felt sorry for Courtney Love. She didn't deserve that.
It's like, did she shove the needle down his neck, or was he addicted for a while? Yeah. Oh, well, she introduced it to her. Did she shove the needle down his neck? No. Shut up.
They basically were feeding off each other, so to blame her for that, I thought was complete nonsense. And to be honest, for as short-lived as Hole was, she was a legitimate musician in her own right.
Pretty good at some points.
Yeah. So I think you people need to cut her some slack.
Yeah. It's just proves that there's still a place for feminism. Great male icon dies, everybody blames the woman.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a good point.
For me, that's what the first half of the '90s certainly is. And then that malaise turned into this kind of cynical, I can't do anything about it, I'm just going to start laughing about it. The postmodernism really took on popular culture in a big way. It wasn't just this elitist movement that it was in the 80s. Like, for example, a big postmodern horror film, one of my favorite horror films of all time, Scream, which came out in 1996. The whole message of the movie is that kids have become so hip and cynical that they're borderline sociopaths, a whole lot of them. It's purely 90s, and that really illustrates how we felt about ourselves.
Yeah, I guess there was that feeling that we become so desensitized at that point because we felt like we had dealt with so much that now we just need to remove ourselves of any sort of human feeling.
Alright, so if the 90s were so great according to us, what would we want to see returning?
It's funny because, Batman comes out in 89, right?
Yeah, that's a 90s movie though.
Yeah.
The sensibility is all 90s.
It's all 90s. Yeah, so for me, I was happy to see Batman return and be reinvented.
Okay, so you got what you wanted.
I got what I wanted. I got my new Batman. I couldn't really think of anything else that I would bring back.
What I really love personally is direct-to-video B-movies. Those were huge in the 90s. I'm talking about companies like Full Moon, which did Puppet Master, Demonic Toys, and things that don't have to do with miniatures. And they were low budget, and the stories needed a script editor, and they didn't have it clearly. But they were all about imagination and how much you can push the limits of fantasy, whether it's in horror or in science fiction. I want to see more of that. Sci-Fi Channel is already doing that, but they're a little bit limited by the conventions of TV where they can't do those horrifying, horrible, disgusting things that a B-movie doesn't have the good sense not to do.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's a good point. Maybe rather than saying that maybe the spirit of disillusionment that seemed to characterize the 90s, maybe the spirit of inventiveness that you're describing here, that's definitely something that would be worthwhile bringing back, because that's really what the 90s was about. It was trying to reinvent itself, not necessarily succeeding, because it was so reactionary in many ways, but innovation.
You were kind of pointing out that, well, the vaults are kind of emptying out, so, DVD sales aren't going to go down necessarily. And it was like, well, that's when you open those houses like Full Moon, produce direct-to-video material.
That seems to be what Jean-Claude Van Damme is doing. Direct-to-video movies. Anyway.
JVCD actually came out in theaters.
Did he?
Yeah.
Okay, that one I didn't know.
By the same token, I'd like to see horror television series make a comeback.
Outer Limits.
Friday the 13th series. That was
Yep.
messed up.
That's true.
Violent. I just saw an episode recently because it shows on the Scream Network. There's a nun who gets raped and crucified by a bunch of mental patients. You're like, you couldn't get away with that on TV today.
Yeah.
That's messed up.
That's actually true. It was strangely liberating on television in the 90s.
And outside of horror, well, depending on the point of view, I suppose, the one thing I'd like to see as well come back, DJ Jazzy Jeff.
Of course.
I want to see a reality TV show explaining what happened to the guy. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, that's Will Smith's partner in his early rap career.
And also played best friend on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I couldn't say that fast. Yeah, who was always getting tossed out on the front lawn.
Yeah, which is incidentally exactly what happened to his public persona.
Yes. That's true. When Will Smith does, well, I can't remember the last time he released a song. He doesn't have Jazzy Jeff anymore.
No, he hasn't had him since before getting jiggy with it.
Exactly. He basically left him at the wayside and continued to become the actor we know and love today.
He's America's favorite black guy.
That's right. He's a big part of the 90s.
Yeah. And Will Smith, he's not just America's favorite black guy, he's America's favorite guy. He's the biggest box office grosser right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he's black is kind of a huge change from just, if you grew up at the same time we did, that would never have happened.
Yeah.
The black actors were there to get killed off so that the white character can go, no, and pat himself on the back for not being a racist.
Yeah, it's true. And he evolved into such a wonderful actor. It was kind of surprising from his, Bel-Air days.
Although early on, I already saw great promise in him when I saw him in 6 Degrees of Separation.
That's right, 6 Degrees of Separation, I think, was probably the first film where you kind of step and take notice and like, wow, this boy can act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's really good.
Oh, that reminds me, someone else we completely overlooked for the 90s.
Who?
Jim Carrey. He was huge. He was everywhere in the 90s. Most people probably know him originally from in the series In Living Color, which was created by Keenen Ivory Wayans.
Mm-hmm.
And then he makes this transition into film. And you see him in things like The Mask, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
Awful.
Dumb and Dumber, which
Awful.
he did with Jeff Daniels, right? The Truman Show.
Overrated.
And that really epitomized Jim Carrey. He was overexposed
And producing crap.
Yeah, basically overhyped.
He's regarded as a complete and utter loser.
Exactly.
And it's too bad because he's finally getting a handle on acting. The number 23, which he played in, the movie's not good, but he's actually quite decent in it.
Yeah, that is true.
He's finally getting a handle, but we're all sick of him because we actually supported him while he was crap.
Yeah.
It's our own fault.
Yeah.
We should talk about House Party and House Party 2 while we're at it.
Kid and Play. Oh, good gracious. What do you want to say about House Party?
It was a big deal when they came out when I was in high school.
I wasn't in high school yet, so I don't know if kids my age are watching it. Not to make it sound like he's a lot older than me or anything. It's not that big an age difference.
Yeah, no, it was a big deal when I was in preschool. And
the only thing I remember best about Kid and Play is it's Kid, right? With the ridiculously high...
Well, they built their entire career on that.
Yeah, exactly. Just built on his hair. He had about a foot of hair on the top of his head. Kind of like Marge Simpson.
Yeah.
And Criss Cross were big.
Yes.
For some reason wearing their pants backwards.
None of those I would want to see back, by the way.
Yeah, no.
It pretty much stopped at DJ Jazzy Jeff. I'll leave it to you to decide before or after. Top things I don't want to see again. Number 4, ABC TGIF sitcoms.
Oh god, Family Matters. It seems like very much an echo of the 80s. For some reason,
Yeah.
someone decided to prolong.
That's because what happened is that Full House, which started in 87 and is very much an 80s streaming mentality, lasted throughout the 90s and led to a lot of shows copying it on that exact time slot.
Yeah,
On Friday nights.
that's a very good point. I was very sick of Urkel. I think everyone was.
And Step by Step. Oh, come on.
Oh,
You could have lots of fun. Oh, wait. Different Step by Step.
yes.
Number 3. Stephen King TV movies.
Oh, yes.
Tommy Knockers, Langoliers, The Stand. They're all terrible, terrible, terrible adaptations. The only one that was a pretty good adaptation was It.
Unfortunately, that kind of resulted in an undeserved dislike for Stephen King. It's just like throughout the 90s for me.
They're so bad and sanctimonious and slowly paced. Number 2.
Yes. Please.
Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
But we still have them, unfortunately.
Dude,
They're still on TV. They're into their next reincarnation.
Alright, yeah, they keep having new ones.
The fact that they keep bringing it back, that series, I didn't like it when it first came out, yet it somehow manages to sustain life.
It still has fans.
Yeah, who are these people?
I can tell you. Dear listeners, now if you've been following the show since the beginning, you're familiar with my dear friend Dennis P. I have a story about Dennis P. So, I was hanging out at his house, and he decided to show me his favorite episode of Power Rangers. To which I said, "Are you... what? Or... what?" So he forced me, and I do mean forced me, to watch half an hour of Power Rangers. I think it might have been Zeo, I think it might have been Neo, I don't know. Power Rangers spoon on my head. And, it occurred to me as I was watching that they were essentially superpowered cheerleaders. They were moving their arms about while going like, 2, 3, 4, 5, Zordon's gonna save our lives, and doing ridiculous kung fu moves. And the reason why he loved that episode is because it was like a reunion of all the Red Power Rangers from all the different series that had gone by. So all the Red Power Rangers were gathering and fighting and stuff, and I was bored out of my mind and looking for a gun. At which point, one of the Red Power Rangers jumps on a Condor-themed motorcycle, and he rides and shoots bad guys in rubber costumes and whatnot, and then sprouts wings and flies off into space with really badly computer-generated imagery. And then he goes, "Well, good job," to his motorcycle, and the motorcycle turns its head and goes like, "It's okay," or something like that. At which point Dennis goes, well, I'm going to paraphrase the words because I don't feel we should use that language in the podcast, but he goes, "Well, that was just stupid." And I'm looking at him going, really? In the 29 minutes that you made me watch, that's the point where you go, "That's too much, the motorcycle turns its head"? That's the point where you go, "Well, I'm not watching that anymore." Number 1, passing by the theaters and seeing girls standing in line for Titanic even though it's been playing for 9 months.
That's a good one. I didn't see Titanic until sometime 2001. I was a little behind. But yeah, that was quite the phenomenon.
That was crazy.
Yeah, the fact that people were lining up for hours just to go see this one film.
That they've already seen.
Exactly. This is one of those films that people actually saw multiple times.
There's a reason why it's the highest grossing movie of all time.
Yes.
And that reason is 13-year-old and has curly hair. Her name is Vicky. I actually was one of those people who wanted to see Titanic long before the hype started. I saw James Cameron on Titanic and some shots, and I was like, dude, I totally want to see. And my girlfriend at the time, I told her, I want to see that. And she was like, really? It's like, yeah, like we should see that together. Back then I lived in Quebec and she lived in Ontario. So we gathered together in Kingston, where she lives, to see Titanic, not on the first weekend, but when it started, not 9 months later. And we saw the movie, and a lot of people whinge on that movie, so they might not know what it actually is. What it is 3 hours of water running.
Mm-hmm.
That's the experience in theaters. In video, it's a different experience because you can pause it and go pee. But in theaters, it's 3 hours of water
Bring your
running.
catheter.
Exactly. And I want to point out that I don't hate the movie. I actually think it's quite good. Grossly overrated, but
Yeah.
quite good. So when we came out, I decided I really needed to pee. And my girlfriend was like, "Oh no, look at the line." And the line was ridiculous. The women were just gathered around the washroom in line that like actually went out of the theater, and then some people joined that line thinking that that's when they were going to get to come in to watch the next show. It was completely insane. I was like, "No, I really need to pee." I was just, "Oh, fine, I'll wait for you." So I go to the men's room. No one's in there.
Oh my god, that's hilarious.
Which I suppose leads us to our Electric Boogaloo Factory entry for today. Titanic. Explaining again what the Electric Boogaloo Factory is, that's when we take a movie that doesn't deserve a sequel and try to make one.
Okay, well, I was thinking we would extend this into a trilogy. I have no substance to any of these films. I just like the names. So, the first would be Titanic 2, The Lusitania, which, again, on a boat, it sinks. And then the third would be Titanic 3, The Hindenburg. Oh, the Humanity would be the tagline for that one.
Ooh, only humanity.
Yes.
See, my tagline for the third one, Hindenburg, would be you've seen the Hindenburg, now watch the Hindenburg.
Yes, we saw the Hindenburg. Now see the Hindenburg. This is too hard.
Okay, so you would just follow those disasters, is what you're saying? Would it follow Rose, the Kate Winslet character? Like
That's right. She's decided to take a trip. She's decided to go on the Lusitania. The Lusitania is attacked.
and somehow she survived.
And somehow she manages to survive. Yet again, I imagine she'll have to fall in love again, wouldn't she?
Big slut. By the way, I know it's completely wrong. It's like, oh, a woman has more than one lover, she's a slut. But
well, perhaps at that time period that might be appropriate.
yeah, but I mean, it's in character. I mean, in the first one, she was a gold digging.
Yeah, exactly. So why I like Titanic 3, the Hindenburg, is because I felt in terms of the 90s, thinking of a film like Speed and Speed 2, we need to do the opposite, where Speed began on land and ended in the water. I felt, now we have to do the reverse. We gotta move Titanic from the water to the air.
That's not the opposite. That's just different.
I know, it's just different. I realized the flaw in my story now.
The thing with it is, I like all these sequels, but I object to you calling it a trilogy, because as Scream 3 tells us, a trilogy must end with things going back to the beginning.
Yes.
Which is why you need a fourth part.
That's right.
Titanic 4 in space.
Oh, let's hear it.
It turns out Jack, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, was actually an alien sent to prep Rose to be king of the world. That's why she drops the jewel as an old woman to the sea, because that jewel is actually an alien rock, a psychokinetic alien device sent to retrieve Jack, who's been living underwater.
Of course.
And then, the old woman dies at the end of Titanic.
Yes.
Yeah. So Jack, immediately after that scene, comes out of the water and brings her into outer space. Actually, you know what? Scratch that. She should just die, and he actually picks her up at the funeral so you can have a big caper with him trying to get her coffin. Then he sends her out of space to train her to become the new leader of the world.
Has he regenerated her body so that she is youthful again? Or is she an old woman in combat boots?
I don't know, what do you think? What would work better?
She's kind of frail, so she might break.
Well, she's in outer space. So
that's true. She weighs like a tenth of whatever she's in before, I don't know. And if he trains her well, maybe she develops some sort of psychokinetic powers, I don't know.
Well, that's the thing, because the psychokinetic element, as the word psycho and kinetic explains, is that it takes the ideas from the mind and puts them into reality, a palpable reality. And so, unfortunately, because of Jack's traumatic experience at the Titanic, that's where we bring it back to the beginning, his subconscious create a giant ice meteorite in front of his ship, and his ship hits the meteorite, so they have to evacuate again.
Out to space. I'm having images of Total Recall here.
And that's because deep down, having lived underwater all this time, Jack feels that maybe fish should rule the world. And that way we can have scenes where Jim Cameron films lots of fish, because heaven knows he loves to do that.
Yeah.
But his love for Rose is true even on a subconscious level, so he gives her an escape pod at the end. That's romantic.
Yeah, that's true romance.
Thus bringing the love story full circle, where he's even willing to sacrifice his ideal for civilization for Rose.
I think that on that
note. Well, if you have any comments, please post them and write to us at thedreamersedge.com. Until then, see you next time.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, thank goodness those are gone.